stress you out? My band tee is on backwards and inside out. And you say, how appropriate. I don't want to dissect everything today. I don't mean to pick you apart, you see. But I can't help it. It's Columbia House Party. Jake, what's up, man?
Not much. I'm excited for this one. I feel like this is an album that literally everyone I know has heard.
All I really want is to talk about this album.
Hey.
Yeah.
I got a hand in my pocket talking about this.
How you doing, man?
I'm good. I'm good, making do, doing what I can. Excited to talk to you about some music I like.
So what I've found so far in doing these podcasts is that there's a sort of curve to how passionate people feel about the albums that we do, where if we go really far back, people don't have super strong takes. I think because our audience probably skews in the late 20 to early 40s range, and the further back you go and the more iconic an album is, the less the less we're being critical about the album and the more we're talking about the influence of it anyway. So you get almost a free pass with that stuff. And then the newer stuff, people don't have too hot of takes because everything is brand new and everything is fresh and you need time and you need perspective. The sweet spot seems to be the late 90s to early 2000s, where people have a mix of remembering their first reactions to it, nostalgia factor, and also having grown with the albums a little bit. So the album today is kind of right in that sweet spot where I'd imagine people have very strong opinions. One of our producers was upset at one of the songs being left out of our prep notes. The reason for that being that this album has so many songs we could have picked. And then also there's the CanCon factor, where I'm sure there are going to be opinions. Our Canadian audience will have strong opinions about it. But also there will be, anytime we do a CanCon heavy episode, the discussion comes up about, what CanCon is and how that changes the conversation about an artist and their success. The artist we're talking about today had some very Canadian success, had some very Canadian failure, and then some very mass success. So where Constantine's were nominated twice for a Juno and accidentally helped create the Polaris Music Prize. Jake, you ready, man? You fired up?
I am. I don't know if this is the biggest one, but it's definitely maybe the fan favoritist one so far. So I'm excited.
It might be. I will also say, if you're in the Queen West neighborhood, I was doing some work at a coffee shop / record store on Queen West called Antica, and this album was playing, and that was maybe a year ago now, and I hadn't thought about or listened to this album in quite a long time, and I was just astonished at how good it is and how well it holds up. Because to me, this album, being a 1995 album, is kind of a childhood album to me. It was one of the 2 or 3 albums that my mom would listen to. And I remember watching the videos on Much Music and things like that. So it's been fun to go back to it as an adult and realize that it still very much kicks ass. I think at this point, everyone can, once you say the artist, you know what album we're doing. The album we're discussing today doesn't need Sunny Day Real Estate or Foo Fighters or anything else to preface it. It stands alone as one of the most successful and arguably most influential Canadian rock albums of the 90s, with several instantly recognizable hits, videos, and ironies. Today, we dive into Alanis Morissette's 1995 tour de force, Jagged Little Pill.
Do I stress you out? My sweater's on backwards and inside out, and you say, how appropriate. I don't want to dissect everything today. I don't mean to pick you apart, you see, but I can't help it. And there I go, jumping before the gunshot has gone off. Slap me with the splintered ruler. Some peace now, a place to find a common ground, and all I really want is a wavelength. And all I really want is some comfort, a way to get my hands
I'll always be down for some harmonica to start a record.
This podcast is called Columbia House Party. There are not many albums that fit the Columbia House part of that name quite as well as Jagged Little Pill. That's part of why we chose it, in addition to the album just being awesome and us wanting to celebrate some great CanCon. Released in 1995, that's kind of at the height of the Columbia House era. If you'll remember from earlier discussions, in 1994, when we have data for it, Columbia House accounted for 15.1% of all CD sales per Funding Universe, and by 1996 had 16 million members. My first exposure to this album was, other than Much Music, was my mom having the CD, which of course she got via my dad's Columbia House, which I believe he canceled and then resubscribed a million times to get that 12 for a penny or whatever, not realizing that, you know, you got to pay for those eventually, and it works out that way. Jake, is this an album that you knew much about at the time? Like, do you have many memories of it, or is this largely a comeback to as an adult for you?
Kind of both, I guess. I think that especially if you're Canadian, I don't know so much what the sort of, I guess, nostalgic vibe of it would be down south, but in Canada, I feel like you couldn't not be aware of this album at the time, even if you weren't like a huge music person. Because, like, as you sort of alluded to off the top, this album has so many singles and so many songs that people know that it was just kind of everywhere. And there's songs in this album that I'm sure we'll talk about that I actually thought were on later Alanis records because they were playing on the radio so regularly so far after this album came out. And then when I went back to it as an adult and realized that these songs were actually on this record also, it was like, oh, okay. Because it was just everywhere. Like this, I'm sure you'll bring this up, but like it's one of the highest selling Canadian albums of all time. It's like, I feel like it was just inescapable for so long that it's impossible to not be aware of it. My parents also had, I think we had a cassette copy of this.
Oh.
Because we didn't get into CDs till a little later. I knew the singles and I knew, but it definitely wasn't an album when I was younger that I was like into. It was an album I knew I would like hear in the car, but it definitely wasn't one of my albums, quote unquote. And then going back to it as an adult, I want to say it was like 3 years ago, maybe. I think Cassie and I were at Zoob's and Melissa's house for dinner, and we put this on, and it was one of those moments that I had where it was just like, oh my God, every song on this album is a banger and also a single.
I've had a similar experience at Zoob's and Melissa's, but Melissa turned on the Moffats instead.
Oh yes, we've done the Moffat sing along there as well. But yeah, I think it's just one of those albums that I think I didn't appreciate why it was so big and popular when I was younger, and now I listen to it, it's like, oh, of course this was the biggest thing in the world.
Yeah, it's great. I'm curious your take before we get into the specifics of the album. When you go back and listen to this, to me it sounds, I feel like the 90s attachment of it is mostly nostalgic. And it actually sounds a little more modern than, you know, this for being a very 1995 moment album. I feel like it sounds a little more modern than that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's song dependent for me. I do think that there are definitely songs on this album that sound like they could have come out yesterday. But there's also a few that I'm like, oh, that's 1995 for sure.
Yeah, we'll get into those. Apologies in advance if we don't get into the Jagged Little Pill song that you want in too deep fashion, because there are so many to get to, and we can only include so many. There, like you said, there are some that are extremely mid-90s. You get that fuzziness. There's the harmonica on there.
Yeah, all I really want was the song I was like, this is from the 90s.
Yeah, which we played off the top, of course. And then I think, you know, whatever it sounds like, Ironic is just like the quintessential mid-90s Canadian rock song. So lyrically, though, this is also pretty advanced as far as a female singer-songwriter in the mid-90s and someone who was only 21 at the time. There's some pretty advanced stuff that we're going to get into. We're going to talk about Jagged Little Pill. We're also going to talk about the fraternity that Jake and Alanis belong to together after this. All right, Jake, you laughed, but you can't lie to us here on Columbia House Party. We all know that there is a secret society of former Canadian child stars. You can spill it now. Did you text Alanis and let her know, or did you like put it in the group chat that we were doing this episode?
Yeah, I actually asked her to come on, and she was like, I would, because we are part of this secret Canadian Child Star Society, but I just have anything else to do. So she decided not to.
She would. She has things like money.
Yeah. She was like, I have other rooms. I have more than one room in my house. So I'm going to spend time in one of those.
Yeah. And not in the Canadian Star group chat. Maybe we can get someone for like Radio Free Roscoe or something like that at some point in the future. We'll aim a little lower than the most successful Canadian rock star of the 90s, perhaps. So
it'll just be Kramer.
Yeah, that works. I mean, he's posting throwbacks to that era all the time.
That's true.
We still got to do a block party episode.
That's true.
Yeah, he'll be on at some point.
A little tease for the people.
This is joking to a degree. Alanis Morissette was a Canadian child star. Born in Ottawa, in junior high, she appeared in a Canadian teen/preteen sketch comedy show called You Can't Do That on Television. At 14, she recorded multiple demos to send to Geffen Records, one of which was stolen in a burglary and never recovered. If you're out there, person that stole that, we will pay you upwards of $10 for that demo, that stolen demo. Eventually, she caught the eye of MCA Records, who released her debut album, Alanis, only in Canada. In 1991, she was 17 at the time. It was a dance pop album. She was getting comparisons to Tiffany. If you don't know Tiffany as a reference and you watched How I Met Your Mother, she was basically the real life Robin Sparkles. It sounded a lot different than Jagged Little Pill, particularly this hit single, Too Hot.
If you want the answers, you need a blast and straight up, baby. So say what you mean and you mean to say it. Hey, you don't have to go and prove it. You just go ahead and do it. Your time is for the take and make it. The best of what you got now. Always too hot, never too cold. You make your best shot, too hot to hold. Never too young, never too old. You gotta go for good.
We were talking earlier about songs that may or may not sound dated. Oh boy.
Yeah. I'm also going to say, for any wrestling fans, tell me that the beat to that song does not sound like the Young Bucks song Warrior Cry, the one that leads off Being the Elite. I know that at least 2 people listening to this podcast will get that reference. And I think that the Young Bucks dad who does their music maybe borrowed from 17-year-old 1991 Alanis Morissette to make their theme music. All I'm saying. It warrants looking into.
That beat just sounds like every song to me that came out between like 1989 and 1993.
Yeah, well, Alanis did it best in Canada. That album went platinum here in Canada.
Really?
Just in Canada.
Wow.
I mean, the bar's pretty low, but it was only released in Canada, and it went platinum here. Too Hot reached the top 20s as a single. She had 2 other songs off that album become top 40 hits. She was so big that at one point she opened for Vanilla Ice. She was nominated for 3 Junos, including getting the W for Most Promising Female Vocalist. Jake, I feel like I cut you off from reacting to the fact that Alanis Morissette at 17 opened for Vanilla Ice.
No, all I said was whoa. That was a very genuine whoa.
I thought maybe you threw a stop, collaborate, and listen. Too many puns on this episode. This is
feeling goofy today. This is a goofy one.
Yeah. All right. So Alanis goes platinum in Canada. She released a follow-up now at 18 years old in 1992 called Now Is the Time. That was a much more ballad-heavy sound, far less sugary. The songwriting improved, but it didn't have quite the same pop sensibility and pop accessibility. That album was only released in Canada. While it once again had 3 top 40 singles, it failed commercially, selling only half of what her first album did. That was the end of Alanis Morissette's 2-record contract with MCA Records. So she was searching for a label. On the advice of Scott Welch, she moved out of her parents' place in Ottawa to Toronto. Her publisher was helping fund things at the time. While she was in Toronto, she met Glenn Ballard, who you might know. He has credits with artists like Michael Jackson, Teddy Pendergrass, Paula Abdul, Van Halen, Aerosmith, No Doubt. Pretty good list of credits for Glenn Ballard. A pretty good guy for a teenage Alanis looking to become more legitimate as a musician to hook up with. Ballard let her use his studio and then helped her write and record Jagged Little Pill. So, according to John Alexander, who was one of her publishers and A&Rs, they had a team of people shopping her songs around that she'd done with Ballard. Maverick Records eventually came to the studio to meet her and hear her. They loved her. In 1995, she signed with Maverick Records. There are some places that say Maverick were the only spot interested. John Alexander has kind of contradicted that in interviews and said, no, they just were the best fit. But needless to say, that this former teen sensation from Canada, who was now trying to make legitimate rock music, did not have a huge market. But Maverick Records took a chance. This would also be her first album to be released worldwide instead of just in Canada. The hope at the time was that it would make enough to get a second album. Basically, they just, it's kind of a, if you think of a rebuilding year, she had the pop success, but now she's trying to branch out of Canada, coming off of a tough album. And the hope here was to build enough momentum that eventually she could make a fourth. Not to shoehorn too many weird references. So, Jagged Little Pill. You guys are pretty familiar with it. The songs that she wrote with Ballard that sold Maverick Records on it, there was some optimism, but like I said, it was not expected that this would be a huge success or a huge breakthrough. We played All I Really Want off the top. That is a pretty killer opening. Jake, you said it's a very 90s sounding song. It's kind of like grunge folk almost. I don't know how you describe that, but that's the best I can come up with is grunge folk. What if Nirvana was a sweet Canadian teen girl?
I think what's sort of amazing about that song specifically, especially if we're sort of looking at it from her transition from Tiffany pop to pop rock star, so to speak, like the vocal quality and the vocal sound is really extraordinarily unique. Like the way she uses her voice and the way it almost doesn't fit with the song itself and the music itself, and they sort of contradict each other in this really interesting way. I think it's such a smart choice to lead off with. If you're like, here's my new sound, and then it's also kind of, if not a brand new sound, at least in Canada, sort of an unfamiliar one, and such like it's so striking and bold that you can't not at least listen. Even if it's not your thing, you can't not sort of like pay attention to it. I get to your point. When you're working in the coffee shop, you're like, oh, this album now.
Yeah, and I think it's a good tone setter on a number of fronts. It was one of the first songs she wrote with Ballard. I couldn't confirm this, but I feel like the title is a nod to Joni Mitchell's All I Want, which, if you're trying to brand yourself or position yourself as what she was to become, a Joni Mitchell shout out is pretty good. And then it gives you a look at the fact that she's a pretty good songwriter at this point already. It's a really well-written song, kind of about the anxieties and self-doubt of a relationship. We hear a lot more now in music, particularly from artists like Hayley Williams or Carly Rae Jepsen, about this fear of being too much and how, there's kind of a push back against that now. There's a lot of that on this, and it kind of turns it around and wonders, hey, why aren't you anxious all the time? There's the great quote, I have no concept of time other than that it is flying, which is a great line to have in a verse that also says, all I need now is intellectual intercourse. You can kind of get the full spectrum of, hey, she's really good, but hasn't quite figured it all the way out yet. Of course, it also gave us the intellectual intercourse tour. So can't say that that line didn't have an important place here.
Whatever the word for vowel alliteration is, just some excellent work there.
So All I Really Want was the third single off the album. There was no official video. To give you an idea of how good the album was, this being the lead-off song, but only the third single, and then flowing immediately into You Oughta Know, that's a hell of a way to start an album. You Oughta Know, by the way, includes Flea on bass and Dave Navarro on guitar. They kind of rewrote and played over an initial demo. As Navarro said, there were no guide tracks. We just had the vocal to work from. And we basically jammed until we found something we were both happy with. Alanis was happy too. You Oughta Know was the first single. It was Alanis's reintroduction into the market away from pure pop. It got actual radio play in the United States, thanks in part to K-Rock in Los Angeles. And it also got lots of actual radio play because it kicks ass. This, I'm sure you already know, is You Oughta Know.
I want you to know that I'm happy for you. I wish nothing but the best for you both. I know the version of me, is she perverted like me? Would she go down on you in a theater? Does she speak eloquently? And would she have your baby? I'm sure she'd make a really excellent mother. 'Cause the love that she gave every day wasn't able to make it enough for you to be open wide. No. And every time you speak her name, does she know how you told me you love her till you die? Till you die, but you're still alive. Well, I'm here to remind you of the mess you left when you went away. It's not fair to deny me of the cross I bear that you did to me. You ought to know I'm here to remind you of the mess you left when you went away. It's not fair to deny me of the cross I bear that you did to me. You ought to know.
The I am having a bad day karaoke song of people everywhere.
Yes.
Is what I would
That's
call
a popular one. Yeah, I feel like it's a good one for karaoke. It's very screamable. The
Yes.
chorus, or yellable. Not scream's not the right word. It's yellable.
I didn't know that I knew that Flea and Navarro were on the song. I didn't know that they wrote it sort of like just jammed to the guide track of it.
According to Dave Navarro, former star of Sons of Anarchy. I'm going to take his word for it.
I also feel like there's a bit of a mystery surrounding this song, if I'm not mistaken.
There is. So before we get to that, this song got Best Rock Song and Best Female Rock Vocal Performance at the 1996 Grammys. So this is the background here. Alanis claimed to Billboard that she wrote it from her subconscious and that she wouldn't remember what she was writing necessarily. But as you're alluding to, Jake, many assume that this is a diss track. It's very specific. It's very pointed. There's a lot of vitriol here. She was a little hesitant to let it out initially. I thought, this is exactly how I feel, but I don't want to hurt anybody. Glenn Ballard just said, you have to do this. As Glenn Ballard told Q in 1999, it was obviously coming from such a deep place within her, I couldn't imagine anything being more precious to her. So I had a religious intensity about getting it right. So she has never publicly identified the ex or the person it's about, or even admitted that it is about a specific person. As she told Can West in 2008, well, I've never talked about who my songs were about, and I won't. Because when I write them, they're written for the sake of personal expression. So with all due respect to whoever may see themselves in my songs, and it happens all the time, I never really comment on it because I write these songs for myself, not other people. Having said that, Jake, let's speculate. Who is You Oughta Know about?
I mean, the sort of prevailing theory is Dave Coulier, no?
Yes.
That's at
Uncle
least
Joe.
the one that that's at least the one that I've heard the most.
Yes, and he has at times admitted it and denied it.
Interesting. I feel like, is it You're So Vain that also has a similar backstory to it, I think?
Yes.
Where like no one really knows who it's about, but like we think we know who it's about.
Alanis has not admitted that this is about Dave Coulier or anyone else. Dave Coulier did say it's, quote, very close to home. Bob Saget has confirmed that he witnessed the phone call that's referenced. There are alternate theories, though. Matt LeBlanc is another popular theory. Apparently, she just has it for people who play characters named Joey. I don't know.
I was going to say just 90s sitcoms.
My favorite one is former New Jersey Devils left winger Mike Peluso.
Oh, that's perfect. And so like Canadian on the nose. It has to be a hockey player, right?
He is not Canadian, but he may as well be. He's from Minnesota. And then the fact that he played for the Ottawa Senators in 1992 and 1993 when Alanis Morissette was living in Ottawa and would have been about 18 while he was, a 27-year-old NHL player in Ottawa. That adds up a little bit.
Cracking the code here, Blake. If anyone's going to figure it out, it's you.
Yeah, I will say this about Mike Peluso. He sure did get a lot of penalty minutes.
Oh, really?
And if you go to his Hockey DB page, he has unbelievable hair. Just some
now I have to check it out.
Terrific flow on Mike Peluso.
That is some 1990s hockey hair.
Yeah. And if you wondered if the Alanis Mike Peluso rumors are to be believed, I was helpful for Peluso's career. He scored a career high 15 goals and 25 points in his lone season with the Ottawa Senators. He also recorded 318 penalty minutes, which is an insane number of penalty minutes. Maybe that was his way of coping. Alanis started writing You Oughta Know, and Mike Peluso started punching people in the face 5 minutes at a time.
He got owned so severely in a song that he was like, you know what? It's time to fight.
Yeah. I mean, the song wasn't out at that point. I'm more imagining that they went through something and he channeled it into face punching while she channeled it into writing. Anyway, we would, if you are following us along on Twitter or are in our Discord chat, please hit us with your favorite You Oughta Know theories. I'm going against the board. I'm going Mike Peluso over Dave Coulier. I think it's much funnier.
I like it. I'm not going to contradict Bob Saget's account, so I'm going to stick with the cool man.
All right. So on the heels of You Oughta Know, you have Hand in My Pocket as the second single. It feels a little weird that Hand in My Pocket in retrospect came out before Ironic, because like logically I could see Hand in My Pocket being something they released after Ironic was such a runaway success. Coming after You Oughta Know, Hand in My Pocket seems like a strange choice as the next single.
Yeah, I don't want to make it too like, this is a BuzzFeed post about the Mandela effect, but like in my brain, Ironic definitely came out first. Maybe just because it was so omnipresent comparatively, but I guess I'm misremembering from being 7.
That song's cool. It has that fun, quirky, like non-sequential callback rhyming where each verse doesn't rhyme the way you think it's going to be, but if you go across verses, the things rhyme. That song peaked at number 1 in Canada, which was her first number 1 single in Canada. It also hit number 1 on the US Modern Rock charts and was the theme song on an unaired pilot for Dawson's Creek.
Huh. That's kind of cool. I can't hear this song without, you get those things that you heard one time like 25 years ago and they're just forever seared into your brain.
Yeah.
I have one of, I couldn't tell you who it is. If anyone listening to this knows, please tell me, because I've genuinely never known. One of those like mid Saturday afternoon CBC radio comedy shows of like Canadian comedians. I heard this when I was like 9, so grain of salt as to who it was or when it was. It was someone doing a parody of this song, and the whole joke in the chorus was that I have one hand in my pocket and the other hand is also in my pocket. And it's not funny at all, but it's been stuck in my brain for more than 2/3 of my life. And so every time I hear this song, I just want to finish every chorus with "is also in my pocket," which now that I'm saying it actually is kind of a good bit.
Yeah, it's Orange Cassidy's entire gimmick in All Elite Wrestling. So Alanis Morissette, that knockoff of Alanis Morissette created Orange Cassidy's gimmick. All right. By the way, I made a mistake earlier. I said All I Really Want was the 3rd single off the album. It was the 6th single off the album, which makes a lot more sense with the point I was trying to make about how how awesome this album was and how deep. Because the third single off this album, which didn't come out, by the way, this album was released June 13th, 1995. This song was released as a single February 27th, 1996. We've talked at times with older albums, especially like mid to late 90s albums on here, about just how different releasing singles was and how albums had a longer shelf life back at that time. This is a great example of that because what I think was, if not the biggest, at least the most culturally omnipresent song off this album was the third single, and that song was Ironic.
An old man turned 98. He won the lottery and died the next day. It's a black fly in your Chardonnay. It's a death row pardon, 2 minutes too late. And isn't it ironic? Don't you think? It's like rain.
The song always starts differently than I remember it starting. That like slow acoustic part, I always like, oh yeah, that's in the song.
You know, first of all, this being a third single that comes out 8 months after the album's been released and is a massive success, it gave this album a second wave of popularity, which is part of why it was so successful in the aggregate, because it had this really, really long shelf life. I also think that Ironic is maybe her best vocal performance on the record. There's like a lot of the rest of the album has this like intentional non-melody to the melodies that, like we talked about, the kind of grunge bases, like the grunge folk sound. This song's a little more straightforward pop, and I feel like, if not her best vocal performance on the album, like a top 2, top 3, which I think gets lost sometimes because the song is like so quirky and was so big. I don't know that it gets the respect that I would like to give it for just being a really, really good song also.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think we've said this before on this show, and I'm sure I'll say it again because it's a thing I do truly believe, that when we're talking about things that are popular in any pop culture, whether it's music or film or television or art or anything, that things become popular for a reason. And it's not just, I'm sure some of it is like, not necessarily this song, but like just in general, especially in music, some of it is like manufactured trying to hit on something, but like things don't become this massive by accident. And I think your point is correct. And the reason that this did is because, yeah, it's quirky and it's like, you know, an easy sort of single, quote unquote, but it's also an easy single because it's just a really well constructed song. And like the melody is great. The chorus kicks in and does exactly what a pop rock chorus should do. And it's just a really well made pop rock song. And I think there's lots of reasons why Alanis is as successful as she is and is as respected as she is. But I think part of it is that the songs are just really well written and are just really solid pop tunes.
And there's a simplicity to it too. As Ballard told Billboard, I'm telling you, within 15 minutes we were at it, just writing. Ironic was the third song we wrote. Oh God, we were just having fun. I thought, I don't know what this is. What genre is it? Who knows? It's just good. There's also an acoustic version of it that's very, very good. By the way, I glossed over it and I didn't really want to talk about it. I should just say, Alanis told Huffington Post in 2014 that she did feel some like embarrassment around the reaction to it not being ironic. But she said, and quote, and at the same time, it is ironic that a song called Ironic isn't filled with ironies. So there you go.
I also feel like it's part of the appeal. Like I also don't want to get too into it because it is sort of like silly hack material. But I think that's also kind of part of the appeal of the song. in a way. Like, it's because it is kind of goofy and quirky. And if everything was like perfectly literarily succinct, that this wouldn't have the same sort of endearingness to it that it does.
Yeah, and it sure did have a kind of a lasting endearingness to it. It didn't chart super well initially and then picked up steam in April and May. It eventually became her highest charting hit, hitting number 11 on the Hot 100. I think the video for it, along with Big Me from the Foo Fighters, is like the most 90s Much Music video in my mind. Maybe you could throw in Walking Contradiction from Green Day, which I think was a little later. Those are like the, oh, hey, music videos are funny.
Yeah. No, Walking Contradiction would be about the same time. That's 95, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. So following that, so Ironic was the third single. She then released You Learn and All I Really Want as singles 4 and 6 over the course of 18 months. The singles of this album spanned July 95 to December 96. Really long runway here. The fifth single was a personal favorite of mine. It's called Head Over Feet, which is just an unbelievably sweet song about how love develops, and it's a huge contrast to the rest of the album in terms of its tone. It's a really great song. This is Head Over Feet.
I had no choice but to hear you. You stated your case time and again. I thought about it. You treat me like I'm a princess. I'm not used to like that. You ask how my day was. You've already won me over in spite of me. And don't be alarmed if I fall head over feet. And don't be surprised if I love you for all that you are. I couldn't help it. It's all your fault. You've already won me over in spite of me. And don't be alarmed if I fall head over feet. And don't be surprised if I love you for all that you are. I couldn't help it. It's all your fault. La, 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 yeah,
I'm glad that you said you find this tonally different to the rest of the album, because this is the song I was alluding to earlier when I said that I didn't realize that this song was on this album. I feel like I remember being in grade 8 and this song was getting relatively consistent airplay. So this would have been in 2000, 2001. So well after the album came out. And I think because of the time that I became aware of the song, which is around that time, and also its tone, until literally like that time 3 or 4 years ago when we were listening to this album at Zub's and Melissa's place, I did not realize this was on Jagged Little Pill. I fully thought it was on her follow-up because it is such a like softer, nicer little pop song compared to the other singles and the other things you think about when you think of Jagged Little Pill.
Yeah, and I think because like lyrically, it's so different. And then in terms of relationship perspective, I don't want to say it's more mature because you can feel a You Oughta Know kind of way no matter what age and where you are, but it feels very far removed from the subject matter of some of these other songs. Alanis at a live show that is uncredited on YouTube but comes via Genius said, when relationships get healthier and healthier, we somehow equate that with not being as passionate or as sexy. I've kind of realized that it's actually sexier when there's less drama. It's been better. And I never thought that would be the case because of the whole clingy, overly dependent roller coaster that oftentimes seemed very passionate and very sexy. When I wrote Head Over Feet about this particular person, it was the first time that I actually had a glimpse of what it would be like to be in love and have it be something that was inducing of the heart palpitations, yet at the same time, I could spend a couple minutes and actually not think about that person. It was very new to me, which I think is a very, very mature way to look at things. Hope to get there one day.
I think it speaks to both her maturity as a person, but also as a songwriter. Like, I don't think you can write I mean, she can say that it's stream of consciousness, and maybe it is, or subconscious, whatever. And I'm not going to sit here and say I know how Alanis wrote her songs, but I think that I don't think you can be as good a songwriter as she is without injecting who you are at the time you're writing the songs into them, or else it's just going to come off as like pandering nonsense. And I think so much of Alanis's appeal is the fact that none of her stuff comes off as pandering nonsense. And so I think that, yeah, it's mature from a songwriting perspective, but it's also just mature as to who she was. And if that's who she was at 21, like, credit to her, because this is, as you said, a fantastic and amazingly well-constructed, nice pop song.
Yeah, it's great. The album, of course, also has non-singles, despite having a ton of singles. There's also a hidden track, or I guess it's not a hidden track anymore, but it was a hidden track at the time, which is a different blend of You Oughta Know, and it kind of reminds me of the start of I Miss You by Blink-182. So if you are so inclined, check that out and see if you hear it. And
I miss hidden tracks.
Yeah.
They were such a nice treat back in the day. Well, now they're just listed on Spotify. It ruined the whole fun.
Yeah, they're just tracks.
Yeah.
Can't hide them.
You should.
The album doesn't really let up. You don't go more than, I think, 2 songs without one of these bangers sprinkled in. And then in terms of non-singles, you also have down at 11, the penultimate song, Not the Doctor, which sounds like this.
Solely yours. I don't wanna be your glass of single malt whiskey hidden in the bottom drawer, and I don't wanna be the bandage if the wound is not mine. Lend me some fresh air. Oh, and I don't wanna be adored for what I merely represent to you, and I don't wanna be your babysitter, you're a very big boy now. I don't wanna be your mother, I didn't carry you in my womb for 9 months, please. Show me the back door. Visiting hours and I undefined, but if I show up at 6:10, well, I already know that you would find some way to sneak me in.
So when we talk about Alanis's influence in a little bit, which we're going to do, I think this song is helpful, even though it wasn't a big single, even though I don't think had a ton of mainstream success or anything like that, because I feel like what she sings about in this song is for a song that came out in 1995, a pretty modern song in terms of the equality that should be present in a relationship and not just existing to fill someone else's void in a relationship. The lyric, "You're a very big boy now, I don't want to be your mother." And the lyric, "The void is solely yours." And the lyric, "Don't want to be your other half, I believe that 1 and 1 make 2." Those are pretty simple lyrics, but I think that, a 21-year-old female singer-songwriter writing about those things in 1995 on a massively popular album was, I haven't studied everything that came out in 1995, but I feel like that perspective that Alanis has and that perspective that she puts forth is a part of why this ended up being such an influential album.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that, you and I have talked and will talk about countless artists who, when you look back and they look back at some of their earlier writings, can kind of go like, oh, and cringe a little bit. And Alanis sort of avoided that almost entirely, even if there's stuff that she maybe doesn't feel anymore because she's not currently in a relationship with Dave Coulier. It's still like I think like so much of this stuff is timeless and has aged so well. And so like not even from a sonic like music perspective, like we were saying, but just from a song perspective, there's very little on this album in many ways and many respects that sounds out of place in 2020.
Yeah, and I think, you know, that's something we want to dissect a little bit more, and we're going to. Although I will say after the break here, there's going to be one quick moment where I push back a little bit on something you said about how she's managed to avoid the, hey, your lyrics from 25 years ago are a little problematic. We're going to talk about that after this. So, Jagged Little Pill is kind of successful, Jake. Kind of successful. It sells 30 million copies. It is the top-selling album of the second quarter of 1996 per Billboard. It garners 7 Grammy nominations, including 4 wins. Album of the Year, Best Female Rock Performance, Best Rock Song, and Best Rock Album. Rolling Stone writes that in 4 months, she has gone from washed-up child star to queen of this year's pop culture prom. There is also, just to 1995 eyes this for you, within that Rolling Stone profile, there is some typical gross music writer in the 90s stuff, like referring to Morissette for no reason at all, petite but curvaceous. In the same article where Alanis is decrying having to do like innuendo radio and having to deal with those kind of radio personalities as a female artist, the writer saw it fit to throw that in there right before, you know, paragraphs before Alanis Morissette talked about how stupid that kind of stuff is. Yeah, the self-awareness there. Good job. Is chef's kiss. Within that story, though, that Rolling Stone piece on Alanis was some more helpful perspective from someone who's not a music writer, Madonna. Madonna was on the same label as Alanis and said, "She reminds me of me when I started out. Slightly awkward, but extremely self-possessed and straightforward. There's a sense of excitement and giddiness in the air around her, like anything's possible, and the sky's the limit." EW has since called it one of the only 3 truly important rock albums of the 1990s, and along with Nirvana's Nevermind and Radiohead's OK Computer. So, this album was credited with ushering a bit of a change to the music scene. CBC in 2005 called it a triumph of attitude rather than acumen, and it galvanized a cohort of female pop singers. Few, if any, outspoken women on top 40 radio. The indie underground had a slew of progressive females upending traditional gender roles and sexuality, but they had faint hopes of breaching the mainstream. Enter Alanis Morissette. That same CBC piece was also pretty critical of her actual talent and chalked up her success a little bit to right place at the right time. They wrote, "For all its false promises, Jagged Little Pill was indeed a salvo and an album viewed by many female songwriters as a call to action. Yes, it produced a spate of bad imitators, but it also diversified commercial radio by giving more females a voice." There's also been some credit given to Morissette for her openness about female sexuality, and like we mentioned earlier, kind of her perspectives on relationship and how 2 people in a relationship should work together, and kind of upending the previously assumed gender roles of, you know, maybe not the 90s, but not too many decades before that. Jake, to your point earlier about her lyrics mostly standing up, there has been a little bit of pushback to the lyrics of You Oughta Know, just because it is kind of, the way I saw it described was that it was a male-like refusal to accept a no. But I don't know about that.
Yeah,
that was from Slate, by the way, in 2015.
I don't think I am qualified to comment on that.
The next line in my notes, Jake, is we probably should have had a female voice line for this episode, but you know what? We can't, can't get a guest every episode.
No, but...
So, in the fallout to Jagged Little Pill, Alanis withdrew a fair amount. She released supposed former Infatuation Junkie in 1998 and Under Rug Swept in 2002. Both of those albums are okay. They're pretty unexciting. She did at least have one #1 hit in Canada, Hands Clean.
If it weren't for your maturity, none of this would have happened. If you weren't so wise beyond your years, I would have been able to control myself. If it weren't for my attention, you would never
never been successful. And if it weren't for me, you would never have amounted to very much. This could be messy, but you don't seem to mind. And don't go telling everybody, and don't look at this supposed crime. We'll fast forward to a few years later, and no one knows except the both of us. And I have honored your request for silence, and you've washed your hands clean of this. This could get messy. I don't seem to mind. Don't go telling everybody, and overlook this supposed crime. We'll fast forward to a few years later, and no one knows except the both of us. And I have honored your request for silence, and you've washed your hands clean of this.
I don't want to keep bringing this up, but to the point I was making earlier about head over feet thing that was on that wasn't on Jagged Little Pill, I 100% thought this was on Jagged Little Pill.
Yeah, it's certainly, it has the sound and the tone. Hey, it's a really good song.
Yeah.
This is, you don't lose your fastball, maybe. But,
The velocity
I don't
might
know,
go
man.
down a little bit, but you keep the pitch. Yeah. I like it.
yeah. Yeah, you still, I mean, look, when you're the quality of songwriter who can turn out an album like Jagged Little Pill, and you're the quality of artist that can go from teen pop success to, kind of culture shifting folk rock success, you're gonna stumble your way into some good songs if you just keep writing and keep making them. Then in 2005, Alanis re-recorded Jagged Little Pill for its 10th anniversary. It was, get your eye rolls ready, released through Starbucks.
Man, remember when that was a thing?
Yeah.
Just like Starbucks
Yeah.
CDs? I feel like Nora Jones' whole
Yeah.
career is like Starbucks CDs.
Back at the time when I thought Starbucks was like the kind of thing that assaults Canadian value. I don't actually know that, but like in 2005, I absolutely would have been like out of my element going into a Starbucks instead of a Tim Hortons. This is what happens when all of your coffee shop experience in your first 19 years are just stopping at Tim Hortons on your way to hockey practice.
Your 519 is showing.
Starbucks seems evil, yeah. So as much as you might roll your eyes at re-releasing the album and re-recording it even and releasing it via Starbucks, there was some understandable reasoning behind it. As Alanis Morissette said, when Jagged Little Pill was released, I went into self-protection mode. I didn't have the wherewithal to honor it and step out of my realm. So this was a little bit of her basically not taking it back, but getting to kind of put it out and experience putting it out there a little bit more, where she had withdrawn after the initial success. So I understand that. I think 10 years is maybe a little too soon to re-release something in general, but
I mean, it's
if
also
it was re-released for her, go for it.
and it's also so massive that I feel like in principle and in general, I would agree with you. But I understand something of this stature and this level of success that, like, yeah, 10th anniversary release it, sure. I get it.
So Alanis has made 9 albums in total,
Wow.
including Such Pretty Forks in the Road in 2020. There is also now a Jagged Little Pill stage show. It debuted in 2018. It hit Broadway in November 2019. It is, quote, inspired by the themes and emotions laid bare in Alanis Morissette's Grammy Award-winning album, Jagged Little Pill is an original story about pain, healing, and empowerment. The reception has been pretty good. It's basically been that, hey, if you go in with the right expectations, this is better than most things like this. Though there have been some music critics who said it loses some of the album's edge in a kind of a trade for accessibility. An album's pretty big and pretty good when it gets a stage show. She's right in there with Green Day in that company now. This is where we normally, pick our favorite tracks from the album. I think we're pretty fond of a lot of the tracks on here. Now, do you have a top 3 that you want to throw out
Yeah,
there?
this one's tough. As you said, like even just picking the songs to have in this episode at all was a challenge. And now picking top ones is hard. I think if I had to go with my top 3, I think this might be the first time I'm not 100% on the order of my top 3, but my top 3 from the album are probably All I Really Want, You Oughta Know, and Head Over Feet. Possibly in that order, actually.
I have Head Over Feet at number 1. From there, it gets a little murky on the order, but I'd have You Oughta Know, Not the Doctor, All I Really Want in 2, 3, 4 in some order. But Head Over Feet is my favorite song off the album. Sub question, Jake. In the spirit of You Oughta Know, do you have any favorite non-traditional diss tracks?
Oh, man.
Can I lead off while you think?
Yeah, please.
Motion Sickness by Phoebe Bridgers, which is allegedly and not so subtly about Ryan Adams, is my favorite. And then there's the whole Taking Back Sunday Brand New War.
Yeah, I'm going to say I'm not sure which song it is specifically, because I genuinely have no idea, but pretty much all of Ben Gibbard's output between Plans and Narrow Stairs. Like even especially because a lot of the songs are kind of diss tracks on himself. Like
yes.
like,
The self diss track is a beautiful art.
I'm thinking of
It's
like
called Dashboard Confessional.
I'm thinking specifically of a song like You Can Do Better Than Me, or I Can't Do Better Than You off Narrow Stairs. I don't know. I can't remember which way the title goes, but that's always one that I'm like, oh, that's definitely written about a person.
Yeah. 2 other ones I'll throw out there. No, It Isn't by Plus 44, which is about Tom. I feel like that's a pretty good
Could also
one.
go San Diego off California. If
Yeah.
we want to talk Tom songs.
And then Call Me When You're Sober by Evanescence is apparently about the guy from Seether, and that song rules. So I like
So
that one.
I haven't heard anyone reference Seether in a long time.
I thought you were going to laugh at me saying an Evanescence song that isn't Bring Me to Life rules, but
No, absolutely not.
Jake, we had 3 of the same songs in our top 3. Do you want to go favorite here, or do you want to go the one that best represents the album? What do you want to do for the mixtape?
I don't know. I think for this one, I think usually we go favorite and very occasionally we go like representation. I think this album is so huge and all the singles are well known that we can kind of do whatever we want. So I'm leaning towards Head Over Feet because it was on both of our tops.
Okay. Yeah, I'm good with that. Like I said, it's my favorite song on the album. I would have gone You Oughta Know if we decided that you had to have you know, the most representative or
Agreed.
whatever. But I'm cool putting Head Over Feet on there. Everyone knows You Oughta Know. And, it'll come up again when we do like a karaoke bonus episode or something.
Yes, which we might do.
If you want access to said bonus episodes and things like monthly mailbags and a space in our Discord chat, you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/Columbia House Party. Failing that, please rate, subscribe, all that good stuff.
Please try the fish.